Poor single dad finds beaten mom and son outside garage, shocked to learn their oil empire heirs. Hook. What would you do if you found a bleeding woman and her terrified child huddled behind your garage at 2 a.m. in a thunderstorm? Marcus Williams made a choice that night that would change everything, not just for him, but for a family worth billions who had been searching for this woman for 5 desperate years. But here's the twist none of them saw coming. The same corporation that had been hunting her down was the reason Marcus had lost everything 10 years ago. Before I tell you how this incredible story ends, I need you to hit that like button and subscribe because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. This is a story about love, survival, redemption, and how the universe has a way of connecting souls that were always meant to find each other. Now, let me take you back to that stormy night in Oakdale, Texas, where everything began. Part 1, The Storm. The rain came down in sheets so thick that Marcus Williams could barely see the hood of his 15-year-old pickup truck as he pulled into his driveway. It was 1:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night, or Wednesday morning, depending on how you looked at it, and every muscle in his 42-year-old body ached from the double shift he just pulled at Henderson's Auto Repair. Marcus killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain pound against the roof of his truck. The dashboard lights illuminated the deep lines on his face, lines that told the story of a man who had known more hardship than happiness in his years. His calloused hand still gripped the steering wheel as he thought about the stack of bills waiting for him on the kitchen counter. The mortgage payment was 3 weeks late. His daughter Lily's school was asking for money for a field trip he couldn't afford. And the refrigerator had been making that grinding sound again, the one that meant it was probably going to die any day now. But Marcus Williams wasn't a man who spent too much time feeling sorry for himself. He'd learned a long time ago that self-pity was a luxury he couldn't afford. So he grabbed his worn denim jacket, pulled it over his head, and made a run for the front porch of the small 2-bedroom house he'd called home for the past 8 years. He was halfway to the door when he heard it. At first, he thought it was just the storm, the wind whipping through the old oak trees that lined his property, or maybe a loose shutter banging against the side of the garage. But then he heard it again, and this time there was no mistaking it. It was a child crying. Marcus froze, rain streaming down his face, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. The sound was coming from behind his garage, that old detached structure he'd been meaning to repair for years but never had the time or money to fix. Common sense told him to go inside. To call the police. To mind his own business in a world that had taught him over and over again that getting involved in other people's problems only led to more problems of his own. But Marcus Williams had never been very good at listening to common sense when someone was in trouble. He moved toward the garage, his work boots splashing through the puddles that had formed in the cracked concrete of his driveway. The crying grew louder as he approached, and now he could hear something else too, a woman's voice, barely audible above the storm, trying desperately to soothe the child. "Shoo, baby, please. Please be quiet. We have to be quiet." Marcus rounded the corner of the garage and stopped dead in his tracks. Huddled against the back wall, partially sheltered by the overhang of the garage roof, was a woman and a small boy. The woman was young, maybe late 20s, early 30s, with dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. Even in the darkness, even with the rain and the shadows, Marcus could see that her face was badly bruised. One eye was swollen nearly shut, and there was dried blood on her lower lip. The boy couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old. He was clutching his mother with both arms, his face buried in her shoulder, his small body shaking with sobs. He was wearing pajamas, just pajamas, no shoes, no jacket, and they were soaked through. The woman looked up when she heard Marcus approach, and the terror in her eyes was something he would never forget. It was the look of a trapped animal, someone who had been running for so long that they'd forgotten what it felt like to be safe. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please don't hurt us. Please. I have money. Not on me, but I can get you money. Just please don't hurt my son." Marcus held up both hands, palms out, the universal gesture of non-aggression. Ma'am, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt either of you. My name is Marcus Williams, and this is my house. Are you okay? Do you need me to call an ambulance? The woman stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her trying to decide if he was telling the truth. He understood that look all too well. He'd seen it on his own daughter's face years ago, back when they were running from a different kind of danger. No, the woman finally said. No police. No ambulance. Please. They'll find us. Who'll find you? But the woman didn't answer. Instead, her eyes rolled back in her head, and she slumped against the wall of the garage. The little boy screamed, a sound that cut through the storm like a knife through butter. Mama! Mama, wake up! Marcus moved without thinking. He knelt down beside the woman and checked her pulse. It was there, weak but steady. Up close, he could see that the bruises on her face were just the beginning. There were marks on her arms too, and the way she was holding her ribs suggested they might be broken. Hey, buddy, Marcus said softly, turning to the little boy. Hey, it's okay. My name is Marcus. What's your name? The boy looked at him with huge brown eyes filled with tears. Ethan, he whispered. Okay, Ethan. That's a good name. A strong name. Here's what we're going to do, okay? I'm going to pick up your mama and carry her inside where it's warm and dry. And you're going to hold on to my jacket and walk right beside me. Can you do that for me, Ethan? The boy hesitated, then nodded. Marcus carefully lifted the woman into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, almost too light, as if she hadn't been eating properly. As he stood up, she stirred slightly and murmured something that sounded like, safe. You're safe, Marcus told her, not knowing if she could hear him. I've got you. You're safe now. He carried her through the rain toward his front door, with little Ethan clinging to his jacket just as he'd been told. Marcus fumbled with his keys, managed to get the door open, and stepped inside the house he'd worked so hard to keep. The interior wasn't much to look at. Second-hand furniture, walls that needed repainting, a carpet that had seen better days, but it was warm and dry and, most importantly, it was safe. Marcus carried the woman to the couch and laid her down gently, then grabbed a blanket from the back of the recliner and covered her with it. Daddy? Marcus turned to see his daughter Lily standing in the doorway of her bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She was 15 years old, with her mother's curly brown hair and her father's stubborn chin. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt that served as pajamas and looking at the scene before her with wide, confused eyes. Who are they? She asked. I don't know yet, sweetheart. I found them behind the garage. Marcus turned back to Ethan, who was standing in the middle of the living room, shivering violently, leaving puddles on the worn carpet. Lily, can you get some towels and maybe find some of your old clothes that might fit him? And start heating up some of that soup from the fridge? Lily didn't ask any more questions. She'd inherited her father's instinct to help first and ask questions later. Within minutes, she was back with an armful of towels and a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt that she'd outgrown years ago but had never gotten around to donating. Marcus helped Ethan dry off and change clothes while Lily heated up soup and made hot chocolate. The little boy still hadn't said anything beyond his name, but his eyes never left his mother's unconscious form on the couch. She's going to be okay, Marcus told him, though he wasn't sure that was true. She's just tired, that's all. Sometimes when people are very tired and very hurt, their bodies make them sleep so they can heal. Ethan looked up at him with those big brown eyes. The bad men hurt her, he said quietly. They hurt her and she told me to run and hide and not make any sound no matter what. Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest, the kind of anger he'd felt only a few times in his life. The kind of anger that made men do things they couldn't take back. Where did you run from, Ethan? Where were you before you came here? But before Ethan could answer, the woman on the couch stirred and opened her eyes. For a moment, she seemed confused, not understanding where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then her gaze fell on Ethan, and relief flooded her battered face. "Baby," she breathed. "Baby, come here." Ethan flew across the room and into his mother's arms. She winced, probably those ribs Marcus had suspected were broken, but she held him tight anyway, rocking him back and forth, murmuring words of comfort that only he could hear. Marcus gave them a moment, then pulled up a chair and sat down a few feet away from the couch. "Ma'am, my name is Marcus Williams. This is my daughter Lily. You're safe here, I promise you that. But you're hurt, and I think you need to see a doctor." "No doctors," the woman said immediately. "No hospitals. They'll check the records, and then they'll find us." Who's looking for you?" The woman hesitated, and Marcus could see her weighing her options. She didn't know him. She had no reason to trust him. For all she knew, he was just another threat in a world that had been nothing but threatening for longer than she could remember. "My name is Elena," she finally said. "Elena Reeves. And I've been running for 5 years. Part 2, The Mechanic's Story." Marcus listened as Elena told her story, his daughter Lily sitting on the arm of his chair, equally transfixed. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the small living room of the Williams house, a different kind of storm was unfolding, a storm of secrets and survival that stretched back half a decade. Elena spoke haltingly at first, her words punctuated by winces of pain and pauses to check on Ethan, who had fallen asleep with his head in her lap. But as she continued, her voice grew stronger, as if the simple act of telling her story to someone who might actually believe her was giving her strength. "My maiden name is Elena Petrova," she began. "I was born in Ukraine, but my family emigrated to the United States when I was 3 years old. We settled in Oklahoma, where my father got a job working on an oil rig. He worked his way up from roughneck to tool pusher to company man. By the time I was in high school, he was managing an entire drilling operation." She paused, her good eye distant with memory. "That's how I met David. David Harrington." Marcus's heart skipped a beat at the name, though he kept his face carefully neutral. Harrington. Why did that name sound so familiar? David was the son of Robert Harrington, the owner of Harrington Energy. You've probably never heard of it, most people haven't. They deliberately keep a low profile. But Harrington Energy is one of the largest privately held oil companies in the United States. They own drilling rights across Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and Alaska. They have refineries, pipelines, distribution networks. On paper, they're worth somewhere between $15 and $20 billion. Lily gasped softly. Marcus remained still, but his mind was racing. Harrington Energy. Now he remembered why the name was familiar. But it couldn't be. It was too much of a coincidence. "David and I fell in love," Elena continued. "I was 22, fresh out of college, and he was 26 and already being groomed to take over the family business. We got married 6 months after we met, against his family's wishes. Robert, David's father, never approved of me. He said I was a gold digger, an immigrant's daughter trying to marry above her station. He tried everything to break us up. Threatened to disinherit David. Threatened my family. But David stood by me." Elena's voice wavered, and Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes. "We were happy. For 3 years, we were so happy. We had Ethan, and David was an amazing father. He used to come home early from work just to give him his bath and read him stories. He said Ethan was his whole world." "What happened?" Lily asked softly. Elena looked down at her sleeping son and gently stroked his hair. "David started asking questions about the company's finances. He found discrepancies, payments to shell companies, transactions that didn't make sense, money flowing to places it shouldn't flow. He told me he suspected his father was involved in something illegal, though he didn't know what. He said he was going to investigate. She took a shaky breath. 2 weeks later, David was dead. They said it was a car accident. Single vehicle, lost control on a rainy night, went off the road and into a ravine. But I knew. I knew it wasn't an accident. How did you know? Marcus asked. Because the night before he died, David gave me a flash drive. He said it contained everything, all the evidence he'd gathered, all the proof of what his father was really doing. He said if anything ever happened to him, I needed to take that drive and go to the FBI. He made me promise. Elena's hands were shaking now, and not just from the cold. I didn't even have time to grieve. The morning after the funeral, Robert came to see me. He told me that everything David thought he'd found was a misunderstanding. He told me to give him the flash drive and forget everything David had told me. He said if I did that, he would make sure Ethan and I were taken care of. But you didn't give it to him. No. Something in his eyes. I knew. I knew that if I gave him that drive, Ethan and I wouldn't live through the week. So I lied. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about, that David had never given me anything. I don't think he believed me, but he left. Elena shifted on the couch, grimacing in pain. That night, I packed 2 bags, took Ethan, and ran. I've been running ever since. 5 years, moving from town to town, state to state. I can't use credit cards because they trace them. I can't work any job that requires ID because they have people looking for me. I've cleaned houses, washed dishes, worked on farms, anything that paid cash. But they found you, Marcus said. Tonight. They found you. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her bruised face. I got careless. We'd been in Dallas for 3 months, the longest we'd stayed anywhere. I thought maybe they'd given up. Maybe after 5 years, they'd decided I wasn't worth the trouble anymore. I was wrong. 3 men came to the apartment we were renting. They must have been watching us, waiting until they knew we were alone. They wanted the flash drive. They said they'd been authorized to use whatever means necessary to get it. She glanced down at Ethan, making sure he was still asleep, then continued in a lower voice. They hurt me. They hurt me badly. But I wouldn't tell them. And then Ethan, my brave, stupid, beautiful boy, he tried to stop them. He tried to fight them to protect me. One of the men hit him, and he went down, and I thought. Her voice broke completely. I thought they'd killed my son. And something in me just snapped. I don't even remember what happened next. I just know that somehow I got my hands on one of their guns, and I got us out of there. I took their car and drove. I drove until the car ran out of gas, and then I walked. I walked until I couldn't walk anymore. And then I found your garage. Lily was crying openly now, tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcus felt like something was breaking inside his chest, something he'd walled off years ago after his own wife died and left him alone with a 10-year-old daughter and a mountain of grief. The flash drive, he said. Do you still have it? Elena hesitated, then slowly reached up to her neck. Beneath her wet, torn shirt, there was a thin chain with a small pendant hanging from it. She unclasped it and held it out to show him. What looked like a simple locket opened to reveal a tiny USB drive nestled inside. I've worn it every day for 5 years, she said. I've never looked at what's on it. I was too scared. And honestly, I'm not even sure it matters anymore. Even if I could prove that Robert Harrington had David killed, who would believe me? He has judges and politicians in his pocket. He has more money than God. What chance does a woman like me have against someone like him? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, colder, with an edge that made even Lily look at him with surprise. You might have more of a chance than you think, he said. Because Robert Harrington isn't just some random billionaire to me. I know exactly who he is and what he's capable of. Elena stared at him. What do you mean? How could you possibly know? Because 10 years ago, Marcus said, Robert Harrington destroyed my life. Part 3, Ghosts of the Past. The storm was beginning to die down, the thunder becoming more distant, but inside the Williams house, a different kind of storm was just beginning. Elena stared at Marcus with a mixture of shock and disbelief, while Lily looked at her father as if seeing him for the first time. Daddy, what are you talking about? Lily asked. You never told me anything about this. Marcus sighed and ran a hand over his face. He looked older suddenly, the weight of memories he'd spent a decade trying to forget pressing down on him. There are things I never told you, sweetheart. Things I hoped you'd never need to know. But I think it's time. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the fading storm. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with old pain. I wasn't always a mechanic living in a house that's falling apart, struggling to make ends meet. 10 years ago, I was a petroleum engineer. A good one. I worked for a company called Blackstone Exploration. We did contract work for the big oil companies, going into tricky areas and figuring out how to extract oil and gas that other companies thought was impossible to reach. He turned back to face them. One of our biggest clients was Harrington Energy. Elena inhaled sharply. We were working on a project in Oklahoma, a deep drilling operation in an area where the geological formations were complex and dangerous. Robert Harrington was pushing for faster results. He wanted that oil out of the ground yesterday, and he didn't care what shortcuts we had to take to make it happen. Marcus's hands clenched at his sides. I was the lead engineer on the project. I told him directly to his face, that what he was asking us to do was unsafe. The pressure levels we were dealing with, the geological instability, if we cut corners, people were going to die. He looked me right in the eye and told me that I should worry about my job and let him worry about safety. What happened? Lily asked, her voice barely a whisper. What happened is